Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to be talking about autoimmune conditions and what it's like to live with them. We have some wonderful guest speakers joining us as well. Firstly, I'll start off with a verbal image description. My name is Stephanie. I'm one of the co-founders and co-presidents of Invisible Illness Awareness Network. I'm a white woman with long brown hair, wearing a gray blazer and a black shirt. And just some quick disclaimers before we get started tonight. None of what we're saying is medical advice, so please consult your physician for any medical concerns you may have. And please note that each person with a condition is unique, even among people with the same diagnoses. We are not experts on these topics, but our guest speakers are experts on their own bodies and their personal experiences with these conditions. So please be respectful.
So, hello, my name's Akanksha. I'm a brown woman who has her medium length black hair, and I'm wearing a navy blue jersey. And so we'll dive right in to what autoimmune diseases are. So these are conditions in which the immune system attacks the body's own healthy cells, and it can often affect multiple organ systems. It's often more prevalent in people who are assigned female at birth and approximately affects 15 million Americans. And there are also over 100 known autoimmune conditions. So, tonight we're going to specifically touch on type 1 diabetes and myasthenia gravis. So, with type 1 diabetes, it's a chronic condition in which the pancreas, one of our organs, makes little to no insulin, which is a key metabolic hormone which regulates glucose or sugar levels in the blood. And specifically, insulin acts to allow cells of different tissues in our body to absorb the sugar from the blood and use it as energy. So, when insulin production is disrupted, as is in type 1 diabetes. Sugar builds up in the blood and is unable to be used by our cells, which can cause serious complications. So, the causes are not exactly known, but type 1 diabetes occurs when the body's own immune system attacks these insulin producing cells in the pancreas. Genetics also may play a role in developing type 1 diabetes, and exposure to a virus or environmental toxins can also engage the immune system's attack mechanisms. Some symptoms include excessive thirst, frequent urinary symptoms, extreme hunger, blurry vision, as well as fatigue. And there are approximately 2.1 million people who are impacted by type 1 diabetes in the US. And treatments can include insulin therapy and glucose monitoring. So now a specific complication of type 1 diabetes as well as type 2 diabetes is diabetic retinopathy, which is a complication that affects the eyes and can cause serious vision problems. So the symptoms of this include floaters, blurry vision, dark or empty spots in someone's vision, as well as vision loss. And just to mention, floaters are spots or strings that just appear to be floating in someone's vision. Some of the causes are when too much sugar builds up in the blood over time. This can cause damage to the tiny blood vessels that nourish the retina, which is part of the eye and responsible for creating visual images. So, cutting off its blood supply isn't really great, of course. Now, some risk factors include having long term diabetes, poor blood sugar control, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. Now, moving on to myasthenia gravis. So, this is a chronic condition characterized by skeletal muscle weakness. And so, skeletal muscles are what connect to your bones. So, they're muscles that connect to that and help you move. And it typically targets the muscles in the eyes, face, neck, arms, and legs. Some of the types include autoimmune, neonatal, and congenital myasthenia. So, autoimmune is where the likely cause is the production of certain types of antibodies that disrupt the nerve to muscle communication. Neonatal is where these antibodies are inherited from the mother who has myasthenia gravis as well. And then congenital is when you have genetic changes that are associated with it. Some of the causes are when the immune system mistakenly makes antibodies that stop a key chemical in our body's nervous system from communicating with our muscles. Some of the symptoms include muscle weakness, fatigue, blurry or double vision, trouble walking, and difficulty speaking, swallowing, or chewing. And this condition affects about 20 in 100,000 individuals worldwide, or about 60,000 people in the US. Treatments include immunosuppressants, IV therapies, targeted molecular therapies, and sometimes surgery.
All right. Thank you so much, Akanksha, for that brief background. And now we're going to go into our guest speakers tonight. We have two wonderful people that are willing to share their stories with us tonight. We have Chelsea, who's at Type 1 Comedian on Instagram. And we have Deanna, who's at resilience period is period beautiful on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And also Deanna, I'm just going to spell the last name so I don't butcher it, Steinle on LinkedIn. So if you guys want to give a brief introduction to yourself, that would be great. Chelsea, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Chelsea Rice. I am a African American male, bald with a gray beard. I'm currently wearing a gray hoodie that I can't remember where I got it, but they're in still. This is my new gray hoodie, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for now well over 30 years. I think it's 36, but it's well over 30. I was diagnosed in the 80s, so you do the math. So
Thank you so much.
My name is Deanna Steinle. I am a white female with shoulder length brown hair. I have on a black shirt covered with a almost teal colored blazer, and I have been diagnosed with Myasthenia Gravis since 1 month after my 30th birthday, which is in 2017. However, I should have been actually categorized as a juvenile patient because it completely answered everything that had happened to me since I was younger. So even though I was diagnosed officially as an adult, I should be actually labeled as a juvenile patient.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely.
Our first question tonight. Can you share your experience with living with your invisible illness, chronic illness, and or disability? And things you might want to discuss are when you started experiencing symptoms, what symptoms do you currently have, and just a brief description about how your condition affects you on your day-to-day life. Chelsea, would you like to go first?
sure. I As I kind of alluded to, I was diagnosed back in the 80s by around 88, 89. Excuse me. And I had no understanding of diabetes, never even heard of it. I think I've heard my grandmother say she had it when in passing, but um, my diagnosis story was basically just I guess the one that many of you heard before, all the regular symptoms of frequent urination, lethargic, um, and my just overall, I was just totally unaware of what was going on with my body. I dropped well over 30 pounds. I was down to like 151 pounds. And once I got in the hospital and got my education, that lasted for like maybe a week. Um, it was many years, in going forward, like in the early to mid 2000s, when I actually experienced loss of vision in my right eye. I experienced blood leaks in my left eye, and then once I got that one um, surgically repaired, I experienced the same thing in my right eye. But unfortunately, I never got much of the vision back in my right eye. So right now, I'm just working with the left eye, and it's been a challenge to say the least. But again, that happened in 2020, 25, like 2005, and here we are, 2026. I'm still able to drive and work, participate in panels like this. But it's definitely been a challenge, and having to still deal with things such as stigma in the workplace has been something that's really, excuse me, that's been my biggest challenge at this point, and something that I've been trying to speak up more and more about lately.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing.
Again, my name is Deanna, and I was diagnosed later on in life, and it was the trying to catch this invisible thing that every time that I was an athlete, I was getting injuries, I was having things happen that didn't make sense, I was having surgical post-op complications because with MG, and I will be using that acronym quite a lot, myasthenia gravis is often just called MG, You don't use certain anesthesia with those patients, and nobody knew that. Why would they be looking for it as well with an athletic, young, very outgoing, y pretty much healthy child except for these really random things that were happening, and so we were just trying to track down this invisible thing that no one knew to look for. And as I mentioned earlier, when I had my 30th birthday, I all of a sudden, it was just like the world fell out from underneath me, and less than a month later, I was officially diagnosed through an antibody blood test. Um, and it was almost like I had the relief of the world on me, and it was this huge exhale of I had answers. So every single year when it comes up to my diagnosis anniversary, I truly celebrate it because it was the first time I had true impactful help that with MG, you can have fatal situations. And MG affects every voluntary muscle, and what people don't realize is that is also your diaphragm. So I have the ability that I just stop breathing. I'm not able to ventilate correctly, and because that's all internal, people think that you're having a panic attack or that you're, um as a female, there's the stigma of you're over exaggerating something, and I fought through all of those things. But the minute I had that positive blood work, everything in my life changed. And it definitely got harder, but I was able to get help in a very impactful way.
For sure, finally having answers and having a diagnosis is really important. That's something we emphasize in our meetings too. It's like you think it wouldn't matter that much necessarily, but it gives you a direction to go and it gives you treatment options to go for and more answers, like you said. Thank you for sharing.
Our next question is, can you both share a little more on your journey to getting your diagnoses? And we can start again with Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, being diagnosed in the late 80s, you can kind of imagine what it was like if you compare it to where we are now as far as anyone that's recently diagnosed. Now, for me, it was something that I, of course, had to really go at alone. There was no community for me because at that time, obviously, there was no social media or any type of, the internet, what it isn't what it is now. And so I was really just kind of floating out there trying to learn whatever I could because even when I was in the hospital getting my education, it was mostly just these different booklets and pamphlets they just left with me since I was in the hospital all week. I had plenty of time to read. So that's basically what it was. I don't even remember the first time I met a diabetes educator because honestly don't think they even had one for me. I think whoever dropped off all those pamphlets, that was pretty much the closest thing I came to a diabetes educator. And so much of my true education about my condition came later in life. Um, when I say when MySpace kind of rolled around, that was the first time I actually came across any other person living with this condition. I still didn't really know anyone in my circle that knew anything about it. So it wasn't so much that I was, say, suffering in silence and when I went to work or, with the friends or whatever. It wasn't so much that I was suffering in silence. It's just I didn't know anything that was going on around me. And so, as I said, fast forward to when social media came on, then I started meeting other people online. And then, of course, in Facebook and then Instagram, all these different openings, came around. And then that's when my education really started. I mean, it was just a constant education. I didn't realize that diabetes burnout was a thing. I thought that was just something that someone just kind of tossed around when they get tired of being diabetic, and basically that's what it is. But I didn't know there was actually a thing, so to speak. So it was for me. It was more or less kind of I had to learn on my own until I started realizing that there are resources out there. And it took meeting more healthcare professionals who were willing to stop and talk to me. I experienced a lot of healthcare professionals who basically would just, we'd sit down and talk, I talk, and he'd type on the computer, and that was pretty much it. It was like, like I was going to buy a part at the auto store. You know, it wasn't anything that really made me feel like like that should be really paying closer attention to what's going on with my life. And so it wasn't until I started finding community, which I drew a lot of inspiration from a lot of different people that I had met. And that's if someone asked me, well, what's the first thing you would want to tell a person who is newly diagnosed, the first thing I always say is find a community because it's really paramount that you do that because this condition is something that the majority of the work is on the patient. The healthcare professionals can give you every kind of booklet, information, talk to whatever. Once you leave the office, then you clocked in. And so you make the choice of whether you want to take heed of what the healthcare professional says, or if you feel that he's not giving you something that you need, that you sometimes often patients are afraid to question their own doctor or to even realize they have the ability to fire their own doctor because you're not getting what you want from them. So all this came from community and just learning what my abilities are and that I'm not just kind of out there floating around like a, shopping bag in the wind type of thing. So it was a learning experience, but it was oftentimes just me at the wheel.
For sure. Community is super important, and it makes it feel less isolating. You find someone to talk to about it. Not only you learn from other people too and their experiences and tips and tricks and maybe a good doctor here or there. For sure, community is really important. Thanks for highlighting that, Chelsea.
When I was diagnosed, there was this almost self-imposed pressure to keep it together. I had not been married very long to my husband, but thankfully we had built um, so much time, almost a decade of friendship before we got married, and there was not as much explaining as I hear in the other community, like the other parts of my community that might be trying to date and have an invisible illness and go through that, where my husband was there for me and was very supportive, which was very different because growing up and having all these doctor's appointments with my parents, and they were fighting for me. They kept pushing. My general practitioner kept pushing. They all knew that something was wrong, but they weren't there in the moment of the diagnosis. And I never knew what that impact was gonna be for me because my parents had been through all of that with me up to that point. And then all of a sudden, the caregiver, the person that I would direct all of my focus and attention to on explaining, helping me through it, guiding me through it, being there for me, the conversation shifted. The priority of where the conversation shifted because it became my immediate family, which was my spouse. Then you have your extended family, your parents, your in-laws, and so forth. And I didn't realize that dynamic even existed. And I really love talking to young people about that because even when you're dating or you're newly married, those conversations change and those dynamics change. And so in that, I learned so much about myself and I learned about what priorities and what conversations needed all of my energy because I could only have so much energy in one spot. And who was going to get that? And how was it when I couldn't even explain it? My doctor can't even explain it to me. How can I possibly tell a person what it is I'm going through and maybe not even try to hurt their feelings? I don't know. You almost word choice and cherry pick what you want to say. It's a mental exercise going through that with all these different relationships in your life. And I found that very daunting in the beginning. So I built Resilience is Beautiful for that, to show not just the journey, but all the things that I was going through in the adventures, the doctor's appointments, the conversations, and what advocacy looked like for me because it's not the same for every single person. And I believe that every level of advocacy, whether that's you in your doctor's office, talking to your doctor, or whether it's doing what I do and consult and go on stages and do all of this, I almost believe even that singular doctor's appointment is way more important than even being out there on a stage, because that moment is where the impact happens for that individual. It's either gonna make or break the next 6 to 8 months for that person, because sometimes it takes that long to get back into an appointment. So learning that communication, where to put that energy, where to put the focus and the word choice and all the things, for me, my diagnosis journey took on that mental jungle gym, as you wanna call it, and I realized it was gonna be a fight.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love how both of you really emphasized community support systems and how it can feel very lonely, but at the same time, there are people that can be in your life who can hear you out or recognize what you're going through. And it's important to lean on them for help, to understand what you're going through for yourself and for the people who are in your life too. It's super, super important.
For sure. And you both kind of already touched on our next question, which is how has your day-to-day life changed since your symptoms started, and how has your life changed since you've gotten a diagnosis? You both kind of covered that. But if there's anything else you want to add to that, like current challenges you face in daily life, whether it be physically, emotionally, or socially. Um, I know, Deanna, you kind of touched on how your condition, what your condition has taught you about yourself, and has your condition influenced your self-view or identity in any way, whether it be good or bad?
Absolutely. I do feel there's times where, particularly not just in my condition, but multiple invisible illnesses, you almost have this imposter syndrome on some days. And I really, really felt that for the first time when my husband and I went on a cruise. When I do my day to day, I kind of pick and choose when I go out of the house. When somebody sees me, whether they see me in the good or the bad, I kind of get to control that environment and that interaction based on how I feel. When you are in a locked environment in the middle of the ocean and people see you get to see people, I didn't realize how much you would see the same people over and over again on a cruise because I'd never been on one. I thought you'd just see different people all the time, and you do. But they would see me having the time of my life the day before and in the water snorkeling or whatever, and the next day I'm completely dependent on my mobility devices and in a wheelchair with a motor being able to get and navigate the ship. And the look of just complete confusion and the staring because they're like, "Wait, I just saw this girl out in the water, snorkeling, doing this and doing that, but I wanna still enjoy my time. I wanna be able to engage in all the activities, and the only way that I can do that is preserving my energy and not putting myself in an unsafe situation." And with MG, that can turn very, very quick. And as I have progressed, I have had to learn that I've got to use things to keep myself in safe situations. And when I saw the stares and the looks on that cruise, I went to my room and my husband and I sat down and I just looked at him. I said, I didn't know it was going to feel like this. I'd heard about people feeling like that in a workplace environment, but I wasn't, I had to leave that environment, corporate America. I wasn't experiencing those interactions. And so that was the first concentrated time where I was like, wow, this is different. This is a whole new level of look and staring that I was not anticipating.
Yeah, you're touching on some of the challenges of having what we call a dynamic disability. It's like some days you're fine and doing great, some days you're not. And in this case, you're talking about preserving your energy so you can have more good days and be able to kind of control what you can. But yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that.
For me, it's I think one of the biggest challenges I'm dealing with now is just, my vision and just being having to consciously constantly be aware of I could cause a commotion here. I have to when I walk out in front because where I work is there's just a lot of I guess you could say obstacles that are different pillars, different walls, and all this kind of. And so if I walk out of something, could be someone coming from my right that I cannot see at all. So I'm constantly looking both ways, um, making sure I don't bump into someone or knock something over. I wish I could just get a ring a bell for every time I've knocked over a wet floor sign in a store. It's it's gotten to be a point. It's like I'm going to be known for the wet floor guy. But what's interesting though is I've been dealing with this since 2006, 2007, and the anxiety is still there. Um, Constantly having to explain it to someone at work. That's one of the most just draining things is constantly having to explain diabetes, explain why this young lady who's recently diagnosed on my team, why she doesn't need to be drinking this sugared soda, but they see me cheat a little and have half of a cookie because they don't understand she's not on fast acting. I am. So if I want to have a cookie, then I just treat for it. It's like the better part of my life has been like one PowerPoint presentation after the other with everything you do. Trying to okay, if I'm not mistaken, I thought we had this conversation last week, so I don't know why we're going over this again. And to the extent where I start to question, are you just challenging me? Which is a very bad thing to do because obviously I've been dealing with this well over 30 years. I've been advocating since 2012 and I've developed a bit of an attitude and I guess a bit of a hidden bravado about when you question my diabetes, then we're going to have a discussion. And that can be stressful, but then again, it has to be done, specifically in my case, in the workplace, because I work with several, there's people that I don't even know that are living with type 1 diabetes and living with their own complications who aren't even talking about their diabetes at work. They haven't even told their supervisor. Now, by ADA standards, they don't have to. But I'm a big proponent of if you ever going to need some help, somebody needs to know what to do. So if you have a coworker that you can trust, let them know. If your team lead or supervisor is willing enough to be helpful, let them know. But at the same time, hold your leadership responsible because oftentimes they'll just look the other way and treat you as if you're more of a liability. And that's when you need to start advocating for yourself. And what I try to do at work is build a community by which I started like a Teams chat specifically for employees who are living with diabetes who actually want to come together in a little spot on Teams and just rant, vent, whatever it is, talk about your new GLPs or what pump you want to get on that you don't know anything about and share that information with any other because I just created that for diabetes, but I'm sure there's folks out there living with irritable bowel disease who aren't talking about it. There are folks that are living with all these different invisible conditions who are afraid to talk about it because they're afraid of losing their jobs or missing out on a promotion or just being treated as not being able to feel like they can be themselves in a group of people. And that need not be, especially for these companies who like to tout the fact that, well, we're a family, we're this, that, and the other, and we support you, and we're really committed to mental health. Well, you can't be committed to mental health when you have supervisors who are disconnected to the extent where they create their own toxic environments on their own team, and none of them have the same mindset. You've got one over that's very supportive, and there's 5 others that don't even want to spend the time learning. So I'm just a big proponent of if you're going to talk about it, you need to be about it, and then somebody's need to hold you accountable because I've been through a lot having to prove my worth as a person living with a chronic illness in the workplace to the extent that I'm exhausted by it. And so when I see it happen to someone like this young lady I was speaking of who's just recently diagnosed, I'm afraid for her, whether she's going to be able to have the strength to stand up for herself. So it would be silly of me to just be casual about this and not be there for her just in case, or not to let her know, look, these are the things I want you to concentrate on. These, did you do this, this? If you have a question or if you have anything that you don't understand, come ask me. If I don't know, I'll go find out. And that's what we do in our Teams chat. If you don't know, we'll find out. We'll find the answer, because I don't want these folks to walk around every day at work afraid just because you need a paycheck, just because you need your insurance. Yeah, we need our insurance. It's a definite, it's a need, it's a purpose. We have to have it because they aren't giving these CGMs and pumps away. We need our insurance to do that. So I hate the feeling of knowing that someone is afraid of losing all that to the extent where it makes them unhealthy. And the reason I'm so passionate about that is because I went through that. The stigma, the the shame. And then looking back on my life, well, why was I even ashamed of that? And having to get through the fact, well, I'm ashamed of being ashamed. I had no reason to do that. And so that's another process, to forgive myself for not knowing better. And so it just comes down to you just, it's difficult to explain, but I'm tired of being tired, and I'm tired of being a spectator watching people being ignored because of a condition they didn't ask for. While those who are uneducated are thinking to themselves, but they did it to themselves. So it's I'm tired of it, so to speak. So that's why I speak as loudly as I can, and oftentimes folks may get offended, but if the purpose, if I get my job done, then you can't take anything from me. So it's my I don't know my journey has been one of hardship, and I don't want to see it happen to anybody else.
No, for sure. A lot of what you said was very powerful. We can talk about so many topics that you touched on for hours, but it's really nice to hear that you want to be a mentor to people at your work and you want to help them in a way that they don't have to suffer the same way you did or question the same things you questioned and spend time on that. And it is tiring re-explaining yourself and your condition. That's like we touched on a little bit today. Like we didn't want you guys to have to give the background info and your conditions and explain it to us. Hopefully, we did a decent job at that. But it is tiring because not everyone knows, and that's why it's so powerful to spread awareness and raise awareness about different conditions. So hopefully we have to explain less and less. Hopefully it becomes part of integrated into everyday life that we just kind of know these things, or at least know the chronic illness or invisible illness experience of having, all of these similar things. People have to explain themselves to their employer and what accommodations they might need. It Hopefully, we get to the point where it becomes second nature just to be like, "Oh, yeah, you need that accommodation? Cool, great, let's do it and move on." But thank you for sharing all of those different, thought-provoking points, Chelsea.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that. I know that's a big deal for you to share that, and I know a lot of young men, hopefully, that will see this and let them know it's okay to be that raw and vulnerable and tell us how you feel. I know that when we moved last year, we moved states, and I didn't get to come immediately with my spouse. He was here developing a community before I did for about 6 weeks or so, and I kept telling him over the phone, he's like, "I can't wait for you to meet so and so. I can't wait for you to meet so and so." It was the first time that I actually was in tears saying, "What did you tell them about me?" I was I had lived in one place my entire life. Everybody knew my struggles growing up physically. Everybody knew that there was something going on, that I did get diagnosed, so that entire town knew, and I was already speaking and doing what I'm doing. So it was like I had a moment to kind of create who I wanted to be in this new place, and I didn't know what that was gonna look like or feel like. And Chelsea, it was weird because it's not that I wanted to hide it, but I was like, how much do I want this new group to know? Because almost 40 years of stuff, and I didn't. It's like, what do I want them to know? I want them to know this new me, this new part, because I'm not the person I was 20 years ago. Those people that I grew up with, that's still how they look at me. I'm the baby of the family that everybody's like, "I helped change your diapers." I'm like, "Thanks." Um, I got to start over, and I didn't know it with a chronic illness what I wanted to divulge, but everybody knew I was out here speaking and advocating, so I wanted to slowly introduce that. I was tired. I didn't want every single conversation with these new people that I was gonna be spending day to day with to just be about that. And I completely sympathize with what you were saying because it was just I had gotten to that point that I was just tired too, um, in a different way, and mainly one of the ways that I felt overlooked or dismissed was people kept saying to me, "Oh, it's just an autoimmune." Like, they put this word in front of it that was devaluing my condition, where I was losing people daily from my condition. You don't say that to someone with MS, that's autoimmune. You don't say it to people who have certain types of cancers, all autoimmune. You don't say, "Oh, it's just autoimmune." It's all of a sudden society's learned the umbrella term, and then you have all these conditions underneath it, and they call it, "Oh, it's just." I'm like, "No, it's not just. It is everything."
It's in the marketing, that's what it is.
Absolutely.
It's in the marketing. Um, because there are certain conditions that clearly get more screen time than others, to the extent where diabetes, for instance, is just it's an afterthought because it's become so, they think it's so common. And then plus the dark side of it, or the unfortunate side of it, is that when you do lose your life, you don't necessarily lose your life to diabetes, you lose your life to the complication. So yeah, he died of a heart attack, but you just forget about the fact that he had diabetes for X amount of years that could have led to the heart attack or the stroke or the kidney failure, things of that nature. So it just gets swept under the rug in the end. And then and like I said, there's certain conditions that just get more attention than others. And folks in the diabetes community have been screaming long and hard to just acknowledge the fact that this condition exists and that the seriousness of this condition is not what you think it is. If you listen to what we've been saying all this time, you'd understand why it isn't. You know more than what you saw your grandmother or your aunt do when they lived with it. So we just have to keep on this. And say this to anyone living with a chronic illness: if you choose to be an advocate, if you're inspired to be an advocate, keep making noise, whatever it is. I use comedy oftentimes. Then I I just start making a whole bunch of noise as much as I can, because if we don't, this is where we start ice skating uphill again. We start fighting for legislation. We start fighting for just recognition in the workplace or in just in our communities. So we have to keep stirring the pot, as I like to say.
For sure, and it becomes a balance of, you don't wanna be seen just as your condition, or, um, you wanna be seen for you and your qualities and everything too, but your life is so engulfed by what you have to deal with your condition. So it's like it's a hard balance of trying to figure out, like, your case of going to a new town, figuring out how much do I divulge to these new people? How much do I want them to know about me and my condition? And I wanna be seen for me, but also be recognized for the fact that I'm living with this and these are the struggles that I go through and you want people to understand. And it's a never-ending battle. It's a never-ending thing that goes on.
Personal safety.
Yeah.
That in itself, because people will take advantage of you when you are open, a little too open,
Mhm. Yeah.
especially when it comes to a chronic illness like that.
And that's the double-edged sword of interacting with people and trying to lean on people or reaching out for help, and the burden of explaining your condition and making it known too. So thank you so much for sharing the reality of the chronic living with chronic illness, living with invisible illness, and not just and also just showing the nuance and the diversity of invisible illnesses too. Our next question is about the treatments that you guys have tried for your respective illnesses. And you don't have to list every single treatment, of course, that you've tried, but some of the ones that were kind of changing things for your life and really improved your quality of life.
Well, mine was, when I first got my CGM, because again, I was diagnosed in the '80s. I didn't get, um, my first insulin pump until around the same time I started having eye issues. That was around 2005. And so the pump and the CGM, those are the 2 things that actually kind of got me to the point where I didn't feel like I was just riding a bicycle with my hands off the handlebars, I was just out of control. And so it gave me the ability, okay, I'll say, I got to do this is telling me this. Now I can actually start doing the things that I struggle with, like carb counting, or usually anything involving math. I was pretty much, I would just clock out. But the upside to that was having a pump and a CGM, since I was a bit of a technical nerd. I'm not a genius by anything. I was a kid. I mean, I grew up with microscopes, and my parents made the mistake of giving me a chemistry set when I was 8 years old. And so, yeah, I put every chemical I had in one test tube, I'm lucky to be here after that. But I like gadgets, and so that was the fun side of just having the pump and being able to just play with these things and learn more about them. At the same time, I'm helping myself learn to take care of myself and be more aware of my diabetes now. It gave me something a little more tangible. Now I can see where I'm at. I don't have to, well, stop and just, well, wait, how do I feel? Let me check my blood sugar and then see where I'm at and then trying to go from there. Now I can see where things are going right now, what I might be doing wrong, how I can improve. So that was the one thing that really, one or two things that actually turned it around for me.
With, MG, the community symbol is a snowflake because every person, every treatment, every expression of symptoms are all different, and I've yet to meet someone that mirrors my disease state in day to day, and coupled with that is a lot of times if you have an autoimmune condition, you also graduate to have more than one. I do not, but that is something I've learned in the community is I've not met someone that doesn't have other things with it. I only have, MG, and when I was first diagnosed, I remember the day someone brought because 'cause I'm a science person just like you, Chelsea. I remember the day they brought me a scientific journal that they had crystallized a part of the disease that you need to start making targeted treatments. And up to that point, I was taking things that they use for other conditions. It's kind of like a blanket thing that you can use in various scenarios with different patients, not just MG. And so I call it the blanket treatments. They're used in all different places. And then they told me, they said, "In the next 5 to 10 years, you're gonna start to see targeted therapies." And that is now. And it is really amazing to see how I am living through the progress, and I get to actually see it happening to people. Um, the funny thing when you play with your nervous system, which is where MG lies, is nobody's gonna respond the same. everybody's different, and it's like a fingerprint. And so you see people try something and be so successful, and then that exact same person tries that and it doesn't even touch them in any way. Even I lost a couple people in the community just past year on treatments I've tried, and that's so disheartening. But that's the reality of our disease, is that everyone's different. Everybody's going to respond differently. I have always been, after the first year and a half, on very aggressive therapies because I cannot live without it. There's a lot of people that could go in remission and they have surgeries, they have a thiectomy, and they do really well. And where it gets tough on a personal level is I have family members that know someone that lives next to them in another state that has MG, that they had a thiectomy. They're on no treatment whatsoever. They're hiking mountains. That's like a dream for me. I won't ever probably be able to do that unless something changes for me. The day that I knew the power of my disease, they had to emergency land a jet for me, and I was non-responsive. I was not breathing. They were breathing for me. They had bagged me. It was all in the back of my mind. I was praying, I just have to stay alive. I have to stay alive. Up until that point, I had other outward symptoms and, of course, things that were happening on my life, but I did not know how it could take my life. And in that moment, I knew this was not something I was just gonna live with. This is something I was gonna fight with. And the doctors came to me and said, "We have to find some regimen that's gonna help you, or you're not gonna be here in a year. It's just not, your disease state is that aggressive." I said, "Okay, so what does that look like?" Service dogs for mobility have always been in the MG community because we have muscle weakness, and they help with retrieval. They help with getting up and down stairs if you fall, getting you up off the floor. There's a variety of mobility tasking that they can do. I had the rare opportunity to actually work, because I had the science behind it, to work with a group to work on scent and to have a dog help me manage daily oral medications on top of my infusions. Because if you take too much, it hurts you. If you take too little, it hurts you. And I could never get that balance. She changed our lives. And I've had her for 7 years. Up until Thanksgiving of this past year, I had never spent a night in the hospital since. And before her, for 4 years, I was admitted every other month. That worked for me. And I say that so cautiously for the community because I knew the science, I understood the science. It's a new thing. And I don't wanna give false hope that that's gonna be that way for everyone. It happened to be the right dog, the right group, the right time. I know there will always be a dog in my plan of care moving forward, but it may just look a little bit differently as treatments progress. But I've been through 6 treatments, and she has continued to prove herself to fill the gap. And I am so grateful for that. So for me, after the plane, and they said, we gotta figure something out. The first, second lines of defense are not your ball game. We're going heavy hitters. We're going down the line. I do have a port. Her name is Portricia. And um, I knew that it was gonna be different. I knew it was gonna be different for me, and that's okay. And I advocate in the community to just say everything about your condition. We are here to help each other and to figure things out, share experiences about treatments and talk about those things, but we are in the unfortunate category. It's just not going to be a mirror image of something. And we just have to trust each other that we're going to just be there and support the journey, because that's really all you can do in the MG community, because it does shift so drastically day to day.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And it's a great thing to highlight that, again, like, not everyone with the same condition is gonna have the same responses to treatment. They're not gonna have the same symptoms. They're not gonna have the same lived experience. It's Everything is so individualized for a lot of different conditions, and understanding that is, I think, a challenge society kinda has, because it's like you connect who you know, I feel like, with the condition. It's like, "Oh, well, I know this person with type 1 diabetes, like, this is how they react, and this is how they do things." And it's like, well, Chelsea could be completely different from that other person that you know. It's like,
Mm.
you don't fully know someone's experience, and that's where it's like, it's hard for people to not make assumptions about things. But again, just highlighting the fact that everyone's different. Treatment options are different. And I'm so glad that you found that with your service dog, that they can fill that gap for you. That's incredible. And like you said, like, I hope it works for other people too, but it's everyone's unique situation. It's hard to have one recommendation. Everything, different treatments work for different people, and it's hard to find
I
what
think
works
the
for each
biggest
person.
I think the biggest scary thing for me was understanding up front. My doctor was very blunt, and I'm thankful for that. I would rather you just tell me. We will figure out my feelings later, but just tell me. Um, he said, "You can be on a treatment for 3 years and it'll just fail. It can just stop." And that's what happened this past Thanksgiving. I had switched to a new one, and then for whatever reason, it just stopped. So I was in step down ICU, and she let us actually know a week ahead of time that it had started to build into this unsafe area, and we kept trying to manage it and manage it and manage it, and I went in probably 2 weeks early than I normally would to go to a doctor because she just kept alerting. It was like, "This is not alleviating itself, like, you are not safe." And went in, he said, "Nope, you're going straight to the hospital," and there we went, and I walked into step down ICU. Before her, I was being strolled in a wheelchair on a caddy, anything. It was so far beyond help that they had to really use everything in their wheelhouse to bring me back to a baseline that was considered safe to discharge. I only spent 1 night in step down ICU and I went home. That's the difference between destroying months of your life to it impacted my week, but I was able to get home.
That's great. I'm glad you were able to get home, and I'm glad that worked.
Yeah.
So, we only have a few minutes left. I don't wanna take up too much more of your time. So, maybe we can end on a question, like, what's a misconception about your condition that you've encountered, and how can we challenge it in society? I know that's, like, a very packed question, but if you can, try to limit it to just a few sentences or paragraphs, maybe.
I only roll my eyes because that's like, okay, let's just roll the wheel here and
Yeah, there's a lot.
they come up with. Um, I think it's the one that just gets me the most is when this misconception that you did it to yourself, and it's so disrespectful. You know, it's almost to the fact that I take it as an insult, honestly, and I take it as an insult when someone says it about someone else that may be diagnosed. It's not. Why open your mouth when you won't educate yourself first? You know, people have this a lot of people have this innate ability to want to diminish something about you. It can be your condition, it can be your job, it can be who your friends are. They can find some way to diminish something about you for the sole purpose of them just not wanting to educate themselves and want to keep you at a level that they can understand. Now, it sounds like I'm just, running down people, but I'm just not everyone's like that. But this is what oftentimes people who are obviously insecure and shallow themselves, these are the ones we have to, avoid. And we have to be able to encourage folks who are also diagnosed with a chronic illness to be aware of that toxicity that you have to avoid it. Don't engage it, just get away from it. Your sole purpose is to survive, not to entertain their ignorance. So you just have to be able to defend yourself. And that's those misconceptions like, well, I mean, what did you eat? Seriously? We're not going that path. So I'm gonna let you just hold on to what you want and then I'm gonna keep moving. So
For sure, and that can be challenging to, I don't wanna say bite your tongue, but, like, you at some point, you can't spend all your energy trying to educate people who don't want to take the time to be educated.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to deal with.
Stephanie, if it's okay, I wanna piggyback on what you just said, and then I wanna tell my 2 things real quick. There's something that I share aggressively with the talks that I do, and I talk about communication a lot between your spouse, your partner, your caregiver, family, etcetera. And as I was saying earlier, like, where do you put your energy? And when someone's not hearing you, I tell them you have to ask yourself a couple questions. What is it about them that they're not wanting to hear you? Does it affect my immediate family? And does it affect my plan of care? Because one of those I have 0 control over. It's something that's going on with them. They're not gonna no matter what I do, I could beat that door down all day long. It's not gonna change anything. The other 2 directly affect not only my mental health, but my physical health, and that is where my priorities have to be. I have a very, very close family member that I love and adore so much, but they refuse to listen to me. They say, "Oh, it's not that bad. Well, I saw you do this, and now you're saying you can't do this. I just don't get it. It must not be that bad."
Mhm.
I can't fight that battle with them anymore because it does not affect my plan of care, or it does not affect my husband and I, and that's where I have to put that energy. So those 3 questions are really, really important to me. And then the part of MG that I think gets I guess where I get tired of is what I just briefly touched on, is that it's just not that bad. And, "Oh, it's just muscle weakness." No, we die from it. This is not something that you just gloss over. Um, and then the subcategory to that is, well, if you do have this chronic illness, you can't enjoy life. And I don't know why I have to pick one or the other. I will fight every day to enjoy my good days because I don't know how long I have, and I don't owe it to anyone to explain myself why I'm going diving at Disney in the disability aquarium, disability certified aquarium. I don't have to explain why I did that, but then the next week I'm in bed for 2.5 weeks and can't get up. I made that choice. I'm gonna go do it. I'm gonna pay for it, but I'm gonna go do it, and I'm gonna share the joy of me getting to do that. I have and do live both of those lives where I can have a good day and go do something, and I'm gonna enjoy my time with my spouse and my family, but then I'm gonna have the days where I'm laying in a blackout room, and it could be a month before I'm back on my feet. They are not, um, what's the word? They are not mutually exclusive, and I get to control that, and I am gonna enjoy my life when I have my good days, because if I don't have those moments to look forward to, if I don't plan something, even if it's a mini thing, going to get ice cream with a group of friends one Friday night, and I put it on the books. I have something to look forward to that I'm doing this. Then there's no reason for me to keep going. I'm going to live and enjoy my life. Um, it's the only good balance that I've found to not get bogged down with living with a chronic invisible illness, because you very easily can, and it can get very dark very quickly. I have my days. I will not sit here and tell you that it is joy all the time, because I have gotten significant, true professional help to get me to where I am today, and I will advocate for that all day long. But I had help to get me to this point of saying, "Yes, we're gonna have bad days, but when we have good days, this is what you're gonna do, and prioritize your energy."
Yeah. It's learning to live with the cards that you're dealt and playing them the best you can.
Absolutely. But it's the community, or not my community. It's people in my social network that go, "That doesn't make sense. How could you do this and this? This doesn't make sense." It doesn't have to, because you're not willing to learn, like
Mhm.
Chelsea was saying. I can't control that. And it has taken me as an individual to grow to that point. I let it eat at me for so long, and I had to grow myself into that space. Doesn't mean it still doesn't hurt, particularly when they're close to you, but I do have to remind myself I can't control their actions or their feelings.
And like you said, you have to prioritize you and your health and how it affects your direct relationships with your family, your spouse, anything that your inner circle, and you have to prioritize you. That's what it comes down to.
Live with the cards you're dealt, but always remember that now that these are now your cards.
Mhm. You get to choose how to play them.
Exactly.
Thank you both for sharing your stories. They've been really empowering and they're your realities. And thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, and thank you for your vulnerability and bringing up excellent thought-provoking thoughts. I really appreciate your expertise and knowledge that you shared with us tonight and your time, like Akaksha said. So, please, people follow Chelsea at Type 1 Comedian on Instagram, Deanna at Resilience is Beautiful on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and some general topics and announcements for the future. Um, as always, all of our events are open to everyone. April, we're going to be covering gynecological conditions on Wednesday, April 22nd, same time, same Zoom link. May, we're going to be covering mental health. So on May 13th, same time, same Zoom link. If you haven't followed us yet, please consider doing so. We try to post pretty often on Instagram and a lot of different awareness days and things. We also, like I said at the beginning of this webinar, we have monthly meetings on different topics, and we're always wanting to talk with people and see how we can learn from each other and spread more awareness about a lot of various conditions. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for watching this if you're watching this on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me.